Welcome back. We continue our conversation on Thabo Bester's escape and rearrest in Tanzania. Joining us now is Chad Thomas. He is an organized crime investigator from IRS Forensic Investigations. Chad, thank you so much for joining us here on the late edition. And one would say, Chad, when you look at a crime of this magnitude, especially, how deep this goes, one would say that, let's start off here. We have heard that the officials knew about this for quite some time, but chose to keep quiet until the media exposed it. What are your thoughts on the fact that the state was actually quite quiet in releasing the relevant information in Thabo Bester's escape?
Mbali, we work on the principle of transparency in South Africa, and it's very disappointing when we find that the authorities aren't reporting back, or in this particular instance, not even advising the public at large of such an audacious escape, especially somebody such as Thabo Bester, who captured South Africa's imagination more than a decade ago. You must remember he was known as the Facebook rapist long before we had stories such as the Tinder swindler. So he already captured South Africa's imagination and harmed a lot of people. The fact that his victims were unaware that he had escaped, and we don't know his mindset. He could have perhaps stalked them, harassed them, wanted to take revenge on them for reporting him previously, just speaks to the incompetence, the negligence on the part of the state and G4S in not making this dramatic escape public a lot sooner.
And coming to the fact that even though he was behind bars, Thabo Bester continued to run some sort of syndicate behind bars with the help, of course, now we know of his partner, Dr. Nandipha Makudumana. If you can just take us through this, how possible can, a prisoner, now that we've seen, run an operation like this behind bars?
Look, we've always known about gangs operating in prisons. We've always known that syndicated crime carries on behind the prison walls. We know that prisoners are able to corrupt warders. We know that they are able to smuggle in cell phones and other contraband. We just didn't realize it was on this scale. If one looks at the fact that there are now stories emerging that Thabo Bester was able to go out on weekends, we're seeing that he lived the high life in his cells. He could eat what he wanted, he could wear what he wanted, he could film what he wanted, he had access to laptops, he had access to cell phones. It just brings home the reality of organized crime existing behind bars. Now, when one looks at the gang structures, gangs have existed in the South African prison system for over 100 years. In fact, our gangs are so well organized that they're some of the most well organized gangs in the world. A lot of other gangs in other prisons around the world have actually based themselves on the South African gangs, especially the number gangs, the Springbokke, the Royal Air Force, the Big Five, and of course the 2-6, the 2-7, and the 2-8. But for me, the biggest issue at hand here is the fact that we've now seen it thrown in our face how brazen organized crime is, how money can literally buy anything. It bought a convicted murderer, a convicted rapist, liberty. It bought him his freedom. But more than just that, there were so many people involved and there were so many variables that could have gone wrong with this escape. One must remember they had to find a body. They had to switch guards. They had to take care of the CCTV. They had to smuggle him out. They had to ensure that there was a safe house. They had to ensure that there were vehicles they could escape in. This was an organized crime of the absolute highest degree. It took a lot of planning. It took a lot of people. It took a lot of fixes. But more importantly, it took a lot of money. And that goes to what you said about the fact that he was running a criminal enterprise from behind bars. Who knows just how many people have been duped? We will never know because a lot of people are embarrassed to come forward, but we do know for a fact that he defrauded, together with Nandipha, tens of millions of rands over the last decade.
And it brings me here, you've just told us and took us through the magnitude of this operation. When you look at how this was actually carried out, does it show that he's just a puzzle from a larger network here that is actually taking place in our country?
Sadly, it comes down to money. It comes down to the fact that we become a society that's obsessed with money. We're obsessed with self-entitlement, but more importantly, we're obsessed with the fact that we believe that money can buy anything. We've seen people washing their hands with the most expensive liquor. We've seen people buying the most ostentatious jewelry. We've seen people driving around in supercars, not caring that they're damaging those cars. And why are they doing that? Because so many times those items have been bought through illicit means. People haven't worked for it anymore. People are now finding it's far easier to dupe one another. And scams have become commonplace. You know, if one looks at the United Kingdom, you would never have expected that 40% of all crimes reported in 2022 were fraud-related. And people don't see the devastating effects of fraud. They seem to think that fraud is a victimless crime. People may have insurance or they had money, they can move on. They can't. Fraud devastates lives. These people, Nandipa and Thabo, were committing fraud. They would not have been able to have collected so much money to be able to spend it on such an audacious, dramatic escape if they hadn't defrauded other people. So it just goes to show that organized crime has seeped into our very moral fiber, our fabric, because people aspire. When you look at some of these scammers that are online, that are driving these sports cars, that are washing their hands with liquor, that are buying the ostentatious jewelry, sadly, they've got followers, and there are people that try emulate them. And the only way they can emulate them is not through hard work, but through trying to create their own scams.
And Chad, does this also maybe then show that, there were a number of people who were actually contributing to this crime, especially looking at the lengths they went to get him out of prison?
There's a lot of people involved. Some were involved knowingly. I think the majority were unwittingly involved. A lot of people bought into the brand and the pseudo-celebrity status of Nandipa, and they then believed, coming from her, she gave credibility to Thabo Bester and his multiple aliases behind bars. And he was able to then, by virtue of the fact that she had introduced him to various people, she had him on the big screen at various functions, he was then able to engage with them on a one-on-one basis and solicit funds from them. What the promises were, what the returns that they committed to them, we don't know. Whether it was a Ponzi scheme, an elaborate investment scheme, whether he told them it was investment in crypto, we don't know. My concern is that a lot of people are not going to come forward because they're embarrassed. They shouldn't be. Fraudsters are called con artists for a reason. They're very confident, they're very convincing. The more people that come forward, the more we'll be able to unpack exactly how this crime happened and exactly how much money was involved.
And Chad, there's that famous video which we have seen on social media where while Thabo Bester was behind bars at one of the seminars, a number of people were seen there singing happy birthday to him. Surely it just also then shows the deep rot in the correctional services facility itself that even allowed for him to even link to a seminar where he told those in attendance he was actually in New York.
So there's two things I take away from that. Number one, there's a massive failure on the part of G4S and correctional services for him to be allowed. You know, even if he's in solitary confinement, he's in a cell, he's dressed in normal clothes. He's actually dressed very smartly. He's playing along to the crowd, which means that the warders and the other prisoners knew exactly what was happening. But for me, what stood out about that particular video, as well as the new video that surfaced of him singing and dancing in prison, is the sheer audacious nature of the person that we know as Thabo Bester. He didn't know if any of his victims may be in the crowd that particular day that were singing happy birthday to him. He's not exactly a person that you are going to forget if you're one of his victims. But he was so audacious that he took the chance of appearing in public through virtual media, through this link up, not knowing and obviously not caring whether some of his victims were in the audience. And that just goes to show the character of the individual we're dealing with. With Nandipa, when she had to appear in court, they had to actually ask her to remove the mask and the hoodie because she wanted to keep her identity hidden. She's embarrassed. She seems shamed by this entire thing. He, on the other hand, when he was in court, he was loving the attention. He was looking at every camera that came his way. He even at one stage asked his attorney whether he would be able to address the court. So we've got two very different personalities at play here. And look, make no mistake, I'm not in any way saying she's a victim. She was a willing accomplice all the way, but their personalities are so different. That's why I foresee that if people do come forward and lay charges, she may take a plea arrangement at a later stage, but he's going to lap up as much attention as possible and try to drag this out for as long as possible, because it means he gets to leave prison, he gets to go stand in the dock, he gets to carry on playing to his audience. And that to me is the sickening aspect of this entire case.
And what does this say, Chad, about our country, the state of our correctional services, and the kind of crimes that people commit, and, we ultimately then see them out in the streets?
Everybody knows somebody that's been scammed in an advance fee fraud or a forex scam or a crypto type fraud. But before those people were scammed, the people that scammed them, they saw them on social media. They saw them living the high life and they wanted to emulate that. We need to get back to basics. We need to find our moral compass in South Africa. We're allowing criminals to get the better of us. And that is so worrying right now. We see criminals being able to buy justice. If he was able to buy his way out of prison, who says that the next audacious criminal doesn't have somebody approach a judge and try to bribe a judge? And that's what's so worrying, the audaciousness of criminals in South Africa and the fact that they do believe that with enough money, they can get away with anything.
All right. Thank you very much. That is Chad Thomas. He is from the IRS Forensic Investigations, just talking more about the deep rot when it comes to the story and what it means for South Africa.